The bell chimed like a crystal teardrop, and the door swung inward on Zoraya's polished smile. Her fingers stayed on the handle as if the house might float away if she let go. "Oh, you're here." I held my gift bag a little closer, the hand-knitted sweater I'd made for Tommy, soft as forgiveness, and stepped into a living room glittering with chandelier light and people who spoke in careful tones about things that didn't include me. Then, a streak of joy cut through the room. "Grandma Sherry!" Tommy barreled into my arms, chocolate breath and birthday warmth, my name bright on his tongue. For a heartbeat, everything was simple again. It didn't last. Zoraya's hand closed over his shoulder, the coral polish already perfect for pointing. "Tommy, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first." The words were clean. The meaning wasn't. I found my chair at the far end of a table that seemed to run the length of a runway, silver flashing, crystal winking, like eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Marcus looked up once, a small, tired smile starting and dying at the corner of his mouth when she whispered in his ear. "So, Sherry," she called, bright enough to hush the room, "Marcus tells me you're still with that little cleaning company." Little landed like a pebble in a glass and spread rings I couldn't stop. I said I owned a business. She laughed, a delicate clink. "Oh, how sweet! A business!" Conversations pivoted toward vacation homes and portfolios. My fork found porcelain and couldn't remember how to lift. Dessert arrived, and Grace with it. Tommy climbed onto my lap, leaving a chocolate fingerprint on my dress like a medal. "Grandma, the princess who saved herself?" Our story, our secret ladder. I drew breath to begin, but Zoraya stood, cheeks flushed like warning lights. "Tommy, down, now." He slid off, confused. Then she turned to me. "I think it's time for you to leave." Silence. 20 faces. The chandelier hummed. "It's his birthday," I said, my voice a folded paper. "Security," she announced to no one, because she didn't need anyone. She had the room. "Please escort this woman out." I don't remember rising. I remember the door's cool brass and the night air shocking my lungs. On the driveway, my keys rattled like loose bones. In the rearview mirror, a woman stared back. 68, silver hair mussed by a boy's hug, wearing her best dress that suddenly wasn't. Poor, old, out of place. The words tried to claim me. I set the gift bag on the passenger seat and flattened the shaking in my hands against the steering wheel until it went quiet. What would you do if someone taught you your place at your grandson's birthday, and you knew, before morning, you could teach them theirs? I barely remembered the drive home that night. The streetlights blurred into streaks of yellow against the windshield. My hands clenched so tightly on the wheel they cramped. By the time I parked outside my small apartment, the sweater for Tommy sat unopened on the passenger seat, a weight heavier than it should have been. I left it there until morning, as if the sight of the yarn I had worked into every stitch might undo me completely. The next day, I tried to busy myself with work. Meridian's quarterly reports stacked high on my desk, rows of numbers marching across the pages like soldiers. But my eyes kept drifting back to the reflection in the glass wall, the face of a woman still hearing Zoraya's voice echo across a chandelier-lit table. "Security, please escort this woman out." I pressed my palms against the wood grain, forcing myself back into focus. This was not the first time I'd been underestimated. It was only the most personal. That evening Marcus called. His name on the screen made my chest tighten. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, voice thin, hesitant. "Zoraya was stressed. She didn't mean it." I let the silence stretch. "She humiliated me in front of your friends, in front of Tommy." "I know. I should have said something. But you know how she gets. Everything has to be perfect. Maybe next time, if you dressed up a little more." You know how appearances matter to her circle. His words landed harder than Zoraya's. A son who once defended sparrows with broken wings was now asking his mother to dress prettier to survive dinner at his table. I didn't argue. I only said I needed time to think and hung up before my voice betrayed me. Days turned into a pattern of small humiliations. I learned from neighbors that Zoraya had corrected them when they greeted me warmly at the market. "Oh, she just cleans offices. Marcus supports her." I overheard her once at Tommy's soccer practice, whispering to another mother that I was sweet but simple, as though kindness were a defect. Each jab was delivered with the grace of someone certain the world would nod along. Marcus withdrew further. He answered fewer of my calls, texts trimmed down to one-line updates about Tommy. When I did visit, it was always under conditions. Could I come later so the house would be tidier? Could I bring store-bought cookies instead of homemade ones because Zoraya thought mine looked rustic? I complied for Tommy's sake, though each concession scraped something raw inside me. I began to notice the strain on my son. He walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing for correction. When he poured wine at the table, Zoraya's hand darted to adjust the angle. When he spoke about work, she finished his sentences with a sharper edge. He smiled less. The pattern spread into my company without my realizing it. Rumors floated up from departments about a dynamic young manager in digital campaigns who knew how to cut dead weight. I paid them little attention. Companies always had climbers, but the name attached to the stories stopped me cold. Zoraya Morrison. It became clearer with each report Helen discreetly passed me. An older accountant embarrassed in a budget meeting. A 60-year-old IT staffer forced into unpaid overtime. A custodial supervisor shuffled to nights after refusing a last-minute demand. Different faces, but the same tactic. Strip dignity, cloak it in efficiency, and rise higher on the wreckage. The realization twisted in me. The woman who sneered at my dress, who dared to call me poor before 20 witnesses, carried that same poison into the place I had built from nothing. She didn't just see me as less. She saw anyone older, slower, quieter as disposable. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table with Tommy's unopened gift. The yarn still smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet I'd stored it with. My hands smoothed the soft sleeves while I remembered his arms around my neck, the question in his eyes when Zoraya pulled him away. I whispered the beginning of our princess story into the quiet room. There was once a girl who learned to save herself because no one else would. The words steadied me. It was no longer just about my humiliation. It was about every Margaret, Robert, Janet, who walked my halls carrying the weight of her cruelty. About my son, who no longer recognized the difference between love and control. About a boy who deserved to grow up learning that strength is measured by kindness, not scorn. By dawn, I had made my decision. Tomorrow, I would stop allowing Zoraya to define my place. Tomorrow, she would learn what it meant to face a woman who refused to be small. I arrived at Meridian before the first train lifted the gray off the tracks. The lobby held citrus and glass, the hush of money minding itself. Miguel looked up. "Morning, Mrs. Morrison. Mrs. Morrison." "Morning, Miguel." The elevator doors parted. On the 42nd floor, dawn filmed the city. I went to my desk, woke the machine, and opened the database that keeps a company honest. Notes, complaints, names that surface when the tide goes out. The cursor blinked, impatient. I typed her name. Zoraya Mitchell, Morrison by marriage. Marketing manager, digital campaigns. 18 months. File language glossy as brochure paper. Dynamic, fearless, results-driven. I clicked past the glitter into the bruises. 3 formal complaints from older employees, more informal notes. Careful sentences from people who know truth can cost. Demeaning tone, implied obsolescence, pressure to retire. I read every line. I let anger go cold. Helen knocked and entered like the room might spook. 15 years teaches someone your weather. You're early, she said. Pull me everything on digital campaigns, I said. Turnover, exits, internal communications, quietly. She nodded. Of course. Alone again, I drafted 3 emails. To HR, meet me at 10 with the org chart. To legal, summarize active investigations. To facilities, 1 visitor uniform, small, and a maintenance cap. My fingers did not shake. At 8, Marcus called. Mom, he said, tired. About the other night, Zariah feels awful. She wants to apologize. For calling security to remove me from my grandson's birthday, I said. Or for being seen doing it? He stalled. There's a temporary reassignment at work. Cross-training or something. She's trying to cope. Maybe don't make it harder? There it was. The first bill for the boundary I was about to draw. Marcus, I asked, what do you think respect looks like? Silence lengthened. Not airing family things, he said finally, words that sounded borrowed. And dressing for the room, so nobody's uncomfortable. I told him I'd think about a visit with Tommy and ended the call before the old grief stood up. At 10, HR arrived with an apologetic smile and a folder heavy as regret. Jennifer talked matrices and dotted lines. The org chart looked like yarn after a cat. Under Zariah's column, turnover spiked. Over 50, the attrition was a cliff. These should have reached me, I said, tapping the complaints. They're triaged at the division level, she replied carefully. Best practice is to resolve things close to the surface. Best practice, I said, is not a hiding place. I closed the folder. Effective noon, reassigned Zariah Mitchell to food services for the duration of an internal review. Her jaw slackened. Food services? The dish room, I said. I want an unobstructed view of how she treats the people she calls logistics. She'll grieve. She may, I said. Process it. Proceed. When she left, I took the stairs to facilities. In the mirror above the lockers, I pinned my silver hair into a knot, pulled on a gray uniform and cap. The woman looking back was easy to overlook. I counted on it. The cafeteria breathed steam and urgency. Water hammered in pipes, racks rattled, knives sang, voices braided into weather. I walked the service corridor with a clipboard and the gait of someone you asked to move a cart. Through a porthole window, I saw her. Zaria stood at the sprayer, a hairnet reducing her polish to costume. The manicure had chipped into moons. Luis, quick-eyed and kind, showed her the foot pedal. She ignored him, squeezing the trigger like control could be bullied. The spray arced, stippling her shoes. Mind your splash, honey, Maria said, sliding a pan toward her. 55, forearms corded by work, voice warm without apology. I have a master's in marketing, Zariah muttered. This is a misuse of resources. Everyone's a resource in a kitchen, Maria said. Even the plates. Janet, hair silver as frost, trimmed peppers, steady as a lighthouse. Wet floor sign, she observed, and I placed one without a sound. From that bend, I heard everything. Zariah calling the night shift graveyard people, telling Luis management keeps standards the kitchen can't comprehend, saying maintenance like mildew. Every sentence a rung on the same ladder, up for her, down for someone else. Back upstairs, I called legal. Document what can be documented, I said. I need enough truth to hold. Evening laid a long shadow across my apartment. I set Tommy's sweater on the table and smoothed the knit until the stitches remembered my hands. The phone buzzed. What did you do? Marcus asked. His breath sounded ragged. What did she say I did? You put her in the basement doing dishes. She says you're humiliating her. I reassigned an employee under review to a position where behavior is easy to observe, I said. If humility happens there, that's her work, not mine. She's crying, he said. People are laughing. Did she laugh at Margaret when she called her outdated? At Robert when she said his mind was slow? At Janet when she forced a night shift for refusing a last-minute demand? He went quiet. How do you even know their names? Because this is my company? You could have called me, he said. We could have found another way. There's almost always another way, I said. There is also the way owed to people who kept your servers running and your coffee hot while she sharpened her tongue. He exhaled, paper tearing. Tommy asked why you didn't stay for cake. Tell him I was tired, I said. Tell him I'll see him soon. After the call, the kitchen's quiet returned. I folded the sweater, set it in the drawer where I keep things that matter enough to wait. Then I wrote one more email. Helen, arrange a meeting at 10 tomorrow. Zariah, my office, main elevator. Morning again. I stood at the window as the city brightened like a dimmer switch. Drawing a boundary is not the same as drawing blood, but the arm trembles either way. The intercom clicked. She's here, Helen said. Send her in. I watched her arrive in the glass, ponytail taut, makeup neutral, eyes scanning for someone to downgrade this to a misunderstanding. Excuse me, she said. I was told someone needed to see me about the reassignment. I turned. Recognition shattered across her face, then reassembled into calculation. You, she breathed. How? I walked in through my private entrance, I said, as I have for 35 years. She sat because her knees lost interest in standing. I let silence touch both walls. You transferred me, she said, to the dish pit. You did this to me. I asked you to see the people you haven't seen, I said. You chose not to. This is personal, she snapped. You're punishing me for dinner. This is professional, I said. The dinner only translated what your paperwork had been saying. Fire me, she said. I'm being exact, I said. 2 options. Continue the reassignment with pay during review and demonstrate change, or resign today with a neutral reference. She laughed, small and sharp. You expect me to grovel in steam until you feel benevolent. I expect you to consider other people. She stood, anger lighting clean. Marcus will never forgive you. He may not, I said, letting the heat rise and pass. But he will see you as you are. She left on a click of heels that exaggerated their importance. When the door closed, my hands were steady on the desk. My heart insisted it had run a race. The price arrived at once. A message from Marcus. We need to talk. Tonight. All of us. I replied, 8, my place. Then I left the office lights glowing, a lighthouse for whatever weather was coming. At home, I laid 2 extra cups on the table and opened the drawer for the sweater I promised a boy who still believes dragons can be argued with. Outside, traffic stitched a slow seam through morning, horns distant as gulls. I breathed the rhythm I teach myself on hard days. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Somewhere, dishes dried on racks. Somewhere, a boy was building a cardboard crown. I smoothed the wool, listened to the clock, and waited for the knock that would tell me how high a boundary must be to hold. The knock came at 8 sharp. My apartment door trembled against the certainty of it. Marcus stood outside, shoulders tight, jaw set. Beside him, Zariah looked polished enough to be cut from glass. Her blouse shimmered faintly in the hallway light, hair sleek, eyes heavy with a performance she'd practiced in the mirror. My son looked smaller than both of us, caught in the net she had thrown. We sat at my old kitchen table, the sweater I'd knitted for Tommy folded neatly between us. I poured coffee out of habit. Marcus cupped his mug with both hands. Zariah didn't touch hers. Mom, Marcus began, voice hoarse. We need to clear the air. Zariah told me about the reassignment, washing dishes in the cafeteria. She says you're punishing her because of the dinner. Zariah leaned forward, tone syrupy. I respect what you've built, truly, but using your company to settle family disputes, don't you see how unfair that looks? The words landed like stones. Family disputes. That's what she called dragging me out of Tommy's birthday. calling me poor before 20 strangers. "Is it true?" Marcus pressed. "Did you send her down there because of me? Because of us?" I lifted my eyes to his. The boy who once defended sparrows with broken wings was asking his mother to justify protecting dignity. "I reassigned her," I said slowly, because complaints from older employees filled her record, because she called people dinosaurs when they had given decades of their lives, because she uses her position to step on those she thinks are beneath her. "She says you spied on her," Marcus said, searching my face. "That you disguised yourself, that you've been plotting." Zariah's lips curved. "Marcus, she admits it." My throat tightened. I observed my workplace. I watched an employee demean people who keep this company running. I will not apologize for that. Marcus pushed back from the table, the chair screeching. "You're making me choose between my wife and my mother." The sentence split the room. Zariah's hand curled around his arm, claiming him. "You don't have to choose," she whispered. "She just has to stop." They left together. The door clicked shut like a gavel. Alone, I sank into the sofa. My apartment walls leaned closer, heavy with doubts. Was I truly using power as revenge? Had I become the caricature she painted? Vindictive, bitter, small? My chest hollowed. 2 days passed in fog. At the office, I signed documents without reading them twice. I declined lunch. Even Helen's steady presence felt like light too sharp for my eyes. On the third morning, she came in without knocking. "You look terrible," she said, dropping a stack of files. "So let me remind you who you are." I almost laughed, but it cracked. "Who am I, Helen?" She leaned forward, voice low and firm. "You're the woman who built Meridian when no one believed you could. The woman who saw me as more than a secretary. The one older employees trust to hear them. And now you're letting a spoiled girl and your son's confusion make you doubt that. Doubt that." The words pierced deeper than Marcus's accusations because they carried truth. "He thinks I'm destroying his marriage," I whispered. "Maybe you're saving him," Helen said. "But even if he doesn't see it yet, you can't fold, not when half the company is watching." That afternoon, Margaret Chin came with budget notes. She lingered at my desk. "I heard about the reassignment," she said softly. "Thank you." Her eyes shone with gratitude, too careful to last long in office air, but enough to steady me. The next day, a note appeared on my desk in looping script. "There's dignity in any honest work. Thank you for remembering." Janet Rodriguez had signed her name. I tucked the paper into my pocket, a talisman against doubt. Still, silence gnawed. Marcus's texts dwindled to bare bones. "Tommy lost a tooth." "Soccer game Saturday." No invitations, no warmth. Each buzz felt like a coin tossed. Would I land heads as mother or tails as burden? Mother or tails as burden? One evening, I walked the empty halls of Meridian. The building hummed with the electricity of machines left on overnight. Through glass walls, the city glittered like an ocean. I pressed my forehead to the cool pane and wondered if dignity was worth losing my son. That's when my phone vibrated. A message from Luis, the young man from the dish room. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you. It's different down here with her. We feel seen." 6 words, enough to tilt the scales. I closed my eyes, remembering Tommy's arms around my neck. The sweater folded and waiting. The princess in our story who saved herself because no one else would. My chest loosened. The weight hadn't crushed me. It had pressed me into shape. The next morning, I returned to my office before dawn. I took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote one line in ink bold enough to cut. "Respect is not negotiable." I left it on my desk, a promise to myself. When Helen walked in later, she noticed it immediately. She didn't comment, only nodded once. it was enough. I felt the ember catch. I had bent beneath shame and doubt, nearly broken by my son's silence, nearly convinced by my own fear. But not anymore. Tomorrow would bring storms. Tonight, I knew one truth. I had drawn my line, and I would not step back. The knock came at 8 on the dot. I had been standing in my apartment for 10 minutes already, staring at the sweater I had knitted for Tommy, folded on the table like a truce I might never get to offer. When the door opened, Marcus stood there with his shoulders braced like a man about to carry a load he didn't choose. Zariah stood beside him, polished and gleaming, her blouse immaculate, eyes bright with the sheen of rehearsed sorrow. They entered without waiting for my invitation. We sat at my kitchen table, a piece of furniture that had seen every one of my struggles and triumphs. Marcus's hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Zariah did not touch hers. "Mom," Marcus began, voice strained. "We need to talk about what's happening. Zariah told me about the reassignment. She's in the cafeteria washing dishes. She says you're humiliating her because of what happened at dinner." Zariah leaned forward, her voice softened into silk. "I admire what you've built. I truly do. But using your company as a weapon in family disagreements, it's not right. Don't you see how unfair that looks?" Her words were blades wrapped in velvet. She called my public humiliation a family disagreement, as if it were no different than arguing about holiday plans. Marcus's eyes searched mine. "Is it true? Did you send her down there because of me? Because of us?" I inhaled slowly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I reassigned her," I said, each word carved out of stone, "because her record is filled with complaints from older employees, because she ridiculed people who have given decades of loyalty, because she believes stepping on others is the only way to climb. She says you spied on her." Marcus, "That you disguised yourself, that you've been plotting against her." Zariah's lips curled, triumph flickering at the edges. "Marcus, you hear it from her own mouth." I steadied myself. I observed my company. I watched an employee demean the very people who keep our wheels turning, and I will not apologize for knowing the truth. Marcus shoved his chair back, the scrape against the floor as sharp as a slap. "You're making me choose between my wife and my mother." The words splintered the air. Zariah's hand slid onto his arm, claiming him with a practiced gentleness. "You don't have to choose," she whispered. "She just has to stop." When the door closed behind them, the silence left behind was heavier than their presence. I sat in my small apartment, walls pressing inward. Doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Was I truly using power for revenge? Marcus's face, wounded, uncertain, haunted me. For the first time in decades, I felt brittle, as though one more blow might snap me in two. The following days blurred into a fog. At the office, I signed papers without reading them twice. Lunch invitations from colleagues went unanswered. Helen watched me with her sharp eyes, but said nothing, until the third morning. She marched into my office without knocking. "You look terrible," she said, dropping a stack of files on my desk. "So, let me remind you who you are." I tried to smile. It cracked instead. "Who am I, Helen?" She leaned forward, voice low and firm. "You're the woman who built Meridian when everyone said you couldn't. You're the one who saw me as more than a secretary and gave me a future. You're the person older employees trust to listen. And now? You're letting a spoiled girl and your son's silence make you doubt that?" Her words burned because they were true. My eyes blurred. "He thinks I'm destroying his marriage," I whispered. Helen's expression softened. "Maybe you're saving him from drowning slowly, but even if he can't see it yet, you can't fold. Not now. Half this company is waiting to see if you'll stand or break. That afternoon, Margaret Chen appeared with budget notes. She lingered, her voice tentative. "I heard about the reassignment," she said. Thank you. Gratitude glistened in her eyes, cautious but real. The next day, Janet Rodriguez left a handwritten note on my desk. There's dignity in any honest work. Thank you for remembering. Her looping script steadied something inside me. I tucked it into my pocket like armor. Still, isolation gnawed. Marcus's texts shrank to skeletal updates. Soccer game Saturday. Lost a tooth. No invitations. No warmth. Every buzz of my phone felt like a coin flip. Would I be mother or burden? One evening, I wandered the nearly empty halls of Meridian. Fluorescent lights hummed, and the city glittered through glass like a distant ocean. My reflection in the window looked smaller than I remembered. I pressed my forehead to the cool pane and wondered if dignity was worth losing my son. That was when my phone vibrated. A message from Luis, the young man working in the dish room. Mrs. Morrison, thank you. It's different down here with her. We feel seen. 6 words, enough to tilt the balance. I closed my eyes and thought of Tommy's arms tight around my neck, of the sweater folded and waiting, of the princess in our bedtime story who saved herself because no one else would. My chest loosened. The weight hadn't crushed me. It had pressed me into shape. The next morning, I arrived at my office before dawn. I pulled a blank sheet of paper from the drawer and wrote one line in ink, dark enough to cut through doubt. Respect is not negotiable. When Helen came in later, she noticed it immediately. She didn't comment. She only nodded once, her lips tightening into the faintest smile. The ember caught. I had bent under shame and doubt, nearly broken by Marcus's silence, nearly convinced by my own fear. But not anymore. Tomorrow would bring storms. Tonight, I had one truth left to hold. I had drawn my line, and I would not step back. By Friday morning, the air in Meridian's executive floor felt charged, as though the building itself knew a storm was about to break. I had spent the week teetering between exhaustion and resolve, but the message taped above my desk, respect is not negotiable, kept me upright. Today was the day truth would stop living in whispers and find its way into the open. At 9 sharp, Helen stepped into my office with a calm face that belied the spark in her eyes. HR reports are ready, she said, and the board has convened an emergency session. They want to hear your findings directly. I nodded, letting the weight of the moment settle without crushing me. Bring the files. The conference room filled quickly. Polished shoes clicked against the marble floor. Chairs slid back. Papers rustled. A dozen board members sat around the long table, expressions carefully neutral, but curiosity buzzed just beneath the surface. At the far end, Jennifer from HR looked pale, holding a folder so thick it seemed to sag in her hands. When Zariah walked in, escorted by a nervous assistant, the atmosphere shifted. She wore her best armor, tailored suit, hair glossy, makeup impeccable. Only the faint redness around her eyes betrayed nights of strain. She avoided my gaze, sliding into a seat near Marcus, who had been invited to provide personal context. My son looked weary, caught between duty to his wife and loyalty to the truth he could no longer deny. The chair of the board cleared his throat. Mrs. Morrison, you requested this session. We understand it concerns allegations of misconduct within the digital campaigns division. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate. Yes, allegations of harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority. Allegations that, until recently, were buried in bureaucracy. I gestured to Helen, who began distributing copies of the complaints. Papers moved from hand to hand, eyes scanning, eyebrows rising. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, I continued. All dismissed or downgraded. Margaret Chen, 61, humiliated during a budget meeting. Robert Williams, 58, coerced into unpaid overtime. Janet Rodriguez, 63, pushed to nights after refusing a last-minute demand. My voice grew sharper. These are not isolated incidents. They form a pattern. Zariah shifted in her seat, the corner of her mouth twitching. Those were professional disagreements, she interjected quickly. Any manager has to enforce standards. I turned toward her fully, my gaze steady. Standards do not include mocking age, belittling loyalty, or stripping dignity. They do not include calling colleagues dinosaurs or suggesting their value expired with their youth. A ripple of discomfort passed around the table. Some board members shifted, some leaned forward. I pressed on. Last week, I placed Ms. Mitchell in food services to observe her behavior in an environment where power could not shield her. I did not reveal myself. What I saw confirmed every line in those complaints. She called hardworking staff maintenance, dismissed them as unskilled, and mocked their accents. Even after consequence, she learned nothing. Gasps rippled through the room. Zariah's face flushed, then hardened into polished outrage. This is entrapment. You spying on your own employees, disguising yourself to humiliate me? This is personal revenge, not leadership. I stepped closer to the table, palms flat against the polished wood. It became personal the moment you humiliated me in front of my grandson. Yes. But it became professional the moment I discovered a trail of broken employees you left behind. You didn't just try to break me, Zariah. You tried to break the very foundation of what I built. The room held its breath. Marcus shifted uneasily, then spoke, voice tight. Mom, maybe this could have been handled privately. Privately? I turned toward him, my tone softer but unyielding. Privately is what allowed this to grow. Privately is why Margaret cried in her car after work. Privately is why Robert considered early retirement. Privately is why Janet felt invisible. No more. Marcus looked down, the color draining from his face. I turned back to the board. You wanted results, and she gave you numbers. But numbers without humanity are knives without handles. They cut everything, including the hands that wield them. We cannot allow this culture to fester. The chair nodded slowly. What do you propose? I straightened. First, a formal censure of Miss Mitchell. Second, mandatory restructuring of digital campaigns with oversight from HR and legal. Third, a review of all dismissed complaints in the past 5 years with direct reporting to my office. I let the silence stretch. And fourth, Ms. Mitchell will remain reassigned until the review is complete. If she chooses to resign, she may do so with a neutral reference. If she stays, she will stay accountable. All eyes turned to Zariah. She sat rigid, her knuckles white against the folder in front of her. Finally, she laughed, sharp and brittle. You think you've won. You're just proving you're a bitter old woman clinging to power. No, I said quietly. I'm proving power can be used to protect, not to wound. The board murmured, some nodding, some exchanging glances. The chair cleared his throat again. We'll deliberate, but the evidence is compelling. Zariah pushed back her chair and stood abruptly. Marcus, are you going to let this happen? Are you going to stand by while your mother destroys us? Every head turned toward him. My son looked from her to me, his face torn. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his shoulders slumped. Zariah, he whispered. I can't defend what I've read or what I've heard. Her eyes widened, betrayal written across her face. You're weak, she spat, grabbing her bag. Both of you, you'll regret this. She stormed out, heels striking the marble like gunfire. Silence lingered after her departure. The board chair finally spoke. Mrs. Morrison, we'll move forward with your recommendations. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. When the meeting adjourned, I lingered by the window, watching the city pulse below. Marcus approached quietly, his face pale. Mom, he said, voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You start by protecting your son. That's all I ever wanted for you. He nodded, eyes damp. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy who used to give away his lunch money. Back in my office, Helen entered with a faint smile. You did it, I exhaled, long and steady. No, we just started. That evening, when I returned home, the apartment felt less lonely. I unfolded Tommy's sweater and ran my hands over the stitches. Each loop of yarn carried the rhythm of nights spent fighting for respect, mine and everyone else's. Tomorrow would bring fallout. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe without the weight of silence pressing me down. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Meridian's air felt different. The halls no longer carried whispers that vanished when I approached. Instead, people looked me in the eye, their shoulders straighter. Truth, once buried under reports and bureaucracy, had been dragged into daylight. Zariah lasted only a few more days. She swept through the cafeteria with her chin tilted high, refusing to acknowledge the stares. But when the official review notice landed on her desk, she resigned before she could be forced. Her letter cited personal reasons and the pursuit of new opportunities. No apology, no recognition of harm, just escape. That evening, Marcus appeared at my door. He looked older than his 35 years, as if disappointment had carved lines into him overnight. Mom, he said, voice breaking. I let her turn me against you. I watched her shame you in front of Tommy, and I stayed silent. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. I touched his hand gently. You don't ask. You rebuild. For Tommy. For yourself. For the boy who once believed kindness was strength. His tears fell freely. For the first time in years, I let him cry without reaching to wipe them away. 6 months later, autumn colored the park in gold. Tommy and I spread a blanket beneath the oak trees. He clambered across the monkey bars, fearless. Grandma, watch this, he called, hanging upside down, hair wild. Marcus sat beside me, unpacking sandwiches. He asks about you every day, he admitted. Can Grandma bake cookies? Can she tell me the princess story? I laughed softly. What do you tell him? That Grandma is busy building castles and slaying dragons, Marcus replied, smiling for the first time in months. He says you're the most powerful person he knows. The words sank deep. Power had never been in titles or polished shoes. Real power was in standing tall when others tried to shrink you, in protecting those who couldn't defend themselves, in choosing dignity over silence. When the sun dipped low, Tommy tugged my hand toward the sandbox where he had built a crooked castle from sand and twigs. I knelt, admiring it as though it were made of stone. Families laughed around us, ordinary life carrying on. That simple joy was all I had fought for, the right to belong in my grandson's world without apology. Later, back at my apartment, I turned on a single kitchen lamp. My phone buzzed with a message from Tommy. Good night, Grandma. Don't forget, dragons hate the dark. Leave the light on. I smiled, leaving it glowing just for him. As I lay in bed, I thought of Zariah. Somewhere far away, still running from consequences, still convinced accountability was cruelty. I felt sadness for her, not bitterness. Some people never learn that accountability is freedom. I had, and because of that, I could finally sleep in peace. Real power is not crushing others. Real power is lifting them, even when they resist. It is knowing your worth, defending it fiercely, and leaving a legacy that whispers to the next generation. Stand tall. Dignity is not negotiable. So I leave you with this. What would you do if someone tried to strip away your place at your own family's table? Have you ever had to reclaim your worth? Share your story in the comments and tell me the city you're watching from. I want to see how far these lessons travel. If this journey touched you, stay with us at Roots and Secrets. Subscribe, share, and keep these voices alive, because stories of betrayal and dignity remind us that love, when tested, can still endure.